Okay, so we're going to start with some simpler problems first, and then we're going to work into your problems that you have, because I want to make sure you got this down prior to doing anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor this first, and then eventually we will get to your problems, but I just want to make sure we got this down packed so that when we actually try doing these problems, you're going to be better equipped to do the problems. So remember, right, we want to find out what two binomials are used to multiply to get this trinomial. So remember, this is the first term. So what we need to do is look at the first terms in the binomial. So the only way to get x squared is to multiply x times x. Okay, so that's pretty easy. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so now what we're going to look at is the last term. And remember, the last term is gotten by doing the last terms in the binomial. So in order to get 8, right, we can either multiply 4 times 2 or 8 times 1. Now, what my suggestion to you is to use the most common way of getting the number. So the most common way of getting the number is 4 and 2. So 4 times 2 gives you 8. X times x gives you x squared. Now, like I told you, remember, the first term and the last term are the easiest terms to get. The hardest term to get is this term right here, which is called the middle term. Remember, that term is gotten by multiplying the inners and the outers and then combining them using addition or subtraction. So if we multiply these inners, that's 4 and x. That's 4x. Now notice we haven't put any signs on anything yet because we'll do that last. Alright, so x times 2 is 2x. What we need to think about now is how can we combine 4x and 2x so that we get the middle term of positive 2x. We want it to be positive, right? So now here's our chance to put in signs. Okay? So we already know that 4 minus 2 is 2, right? So that means the 4 would be positive and the 2 would be negative, right? So 4 minus 2 gives you 2, and it'll be positive 2. So that means this sign on the 4 will be positive, and the sign on the 2 will be negative. Now, what we need to make sure of is that this sign is always correct. Okay, so remember, this is the last term, so we have to multiply the last terms together to get that. So if you multiply positive 4 times negative 2, you get negative 8, which is what we want. So we checked out, so it's good. All right, now you can always check your answer by multiplying it back out and going back to that. So like this is really messy, but you'll get the hang of it eventually. So ultimately our answer was this, so I'm going to write off to the side here. We were given this, 2x minus 8, right? And we factored that into x plus 4 and x minus 2. So this is our answer, so to say. Okay? Now, if you're going to solve a quadratic, then we need to go one step further than this. And we'll talk about that if you need to. So now what we're going to do is we're going to try another problem. So I'm going to just erase all this. And remember, you can always just pause the video if you need to go back through anything else. So I'm going to do another example, and then we're going to do one of your problems. Because I think a couple examples are needed prior to actually working the problem. So the next example I have for you is we're going to factor x squared minus 5x plus 6. Okay? So again, we want to figure out what two binomials are multiplied to get this. Remember, here's our first term, and we have to multiply the first terms in the binomial together. We're following the same exact procedure. X times x is x squared. We're following the same procedure over here. Now if we're going to get our last term, that's going to be either 3 times 2 or 1 times 6. Now remember, I told you to use the most common way. The most common way would be 3 times 2. However, we need to make sure that we understand that there is more ways to get it, and we may have to use a different way. Because if you look at it, 3 and 2 can give you 5, and 6 and 1 can give you 5. So you have to determine which one's going to work. So let's try 1 and 6 first. If 1 and 6 doesn't work, then we'll have to go to 3 and 2. Alright, so we got our first and our last terms. Remember, the middle term is the hardest term to get. So you have to multiply the inners and the outers. Remember, we're using the same exact procedure that we just used. 1 times x is 1x, right? X times 6 is 6x. Okay, so now we need to combine these via addition and subtraction to get negative 5x. Is that possible? Yes, it is. So let's look at it. So if we make the 6 negative and the 1 positive, then we're going to get out negative 5x, right? So it's negative 6x plus 1x gives us negative 5x. So that means this 6 would be negative and this 1 would be positive. And then we put in our signs. But remember what you have to check at the end. You have to check to make sure that this sign is correct. We need to make sure we're getting out a positive 6x. Remember, this is our last term, so we got to multiply the last ones together. So it would be positive 1 times negative 6. That gives us negative 6, and we need a positive 6. So there's a problem. That means we can't use 1 and 6. So now what we need to do is kind of start all over, so to say. But technically not really, because everything in the beginning stays the same. The only thing we're changing is the numbers here. And then we got to go back and do the signs. So now what we're going to do is try 3 and 2 instead of 6 and 1, because 6 and 1 did not work for us. Alright? Okay, so we're following the same procedure. 3 times x is 3x. X times 2 is 2x, the inners and the outers. So now what we're looking at is 3x and 2x. Can we combine those to get negative 5x? Of course we can. We would have to make both of these terms negative. So negative 3x minus 2x gives us negative 5x. If you want a quick explanation of that, we're going to have to do that in the next video because it's about to end. So that means both of these should be negative. Again, we got to go back and check the sign, make sure this sign is correct, so we get the last terms by multiplying the last. So negative 3 times negative, so negative 3 times negative 2 gives us positive 6x. So that means, ta-da, we're done. We got the answer. Alright, so I'm going to have to start over, start a new video because this one is reaching its limitation.